Seltzer Kings
podcasts.
This episode is brought to you by Polestar. There's only one true way to experience the all-electric luxury SUV Polestar 3, and that's to take a test drive. It can go from 0 to 60 in as little as 4.8 seconds with the dynamic handling of a sports car. But to truly understand how it commands the road, you need to be behind the wheel. Up to 350 miles of range, the 3D surround sound system by Bowers & Wilkins. It's all something you have to experience to believe. So book your test drive for Polestar 3 today at polestar.com.
Real people making bold moves. Unforgettable journeys into life's next chapter. This is the Second Act Podcast.
Every day is a new chance. Mindset on a new path. Anything is possible. Any limit I surpass. Everything is in my grasp. I got tunnel vision with a pickaxe. Life is more fun when you live like there's no strings attached.
Here we are again, John. Back in action.
Yes, sir. You know, Michael, I was thinking right before we got on this episode, we took a little bit of time off, and then we have started recording, and now we're kind of getting back into a rhythm. I always think, getting back into the gym or getting back into something, it's always hard that first or second iteration until you get back into that rhythm again. And so,
yeah,
man, I'm glad to be doing this again with you.
Yeah, likewise, John. The ebbs and flows of the Second Act movement that we're on here and some of the cool things that we have happening and the seasonality of some of the work that we do. It's fun to re-engage through this forum and meet some amazing guests like we have today to share their stories with our audience and talk about their journeys for others to hopefully follow in some ways. So it's been so rewarding, and we're super excited about some of the products and things that are coming out. So
yeah, why don't you give a little tease if you can? You're better at it. I tell people honesty is my biggest strength and my worst weakness because I just come out and say it. You're better at having a poker face on what's going on.
So earlier this year, we started to reach out to some folks as part of a research project. We wanted to know more about a specific industry, what some of the pain points were, and me spending a decade or two in technology, I was like, man, maybe there's a way to solve some of these pain points through technology. So that research has informed some of the work that we're doing on our side, and our guest today was one of the people who was gracious to help us out in that research. And she also happens to be local, which is always fun because then you can meet up over coffee or lunch sometime. And I had suggested, you have such a cool story. Would you be interested in coming on our show? And she said yes. So we're super excited to introduce her. And I think that's a great segue to do that.
Yeah.
So today we are super excited to welcome Michaella Gallina. She went from being a Wall Street powerhouse to a financial freedom advocate. Michaella grew up in a rural town of 4,000 where she learned early that money wasn't about status, it was about freedom. That lesson propelled her from small town roots to the heights of global finance, where she managed multi-billion-dollar portfolios, met with CEOs like Mark Zuckerberg and Tim Cook, and rose to CFO of a $100 million fintech company, financial technology company.
You don't hear that every day.
No, well, you don't. And after years of high-pressure boardrooms and relentless travel, Michaella made a bold pivot, walking away from it all to empower women to master their money and build the life they truly want. Today, she teaches others how to build their own FU fund. We're not going to use the expletive here, but you can figure out what that means. Unlocking financial independence, purpose, and possibility. So welcome to the show, Michaella.
Thank you so much. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. That tickled me. That was so nice. Thank you.
That's
absolutely
awesome. Yeah, Michaella, it is still a kids-friendly show because my two kids listen. So.
Hey, I believe it. And you know what? I grew up in a household that did not drink and did not cuss. So I understand the value of that for sure.
I joined the Marine Corps for 20 years where they did both those proliferately. And so I'm trying to bring it back to kid-friendly. But welcome to the show, Michaella. It's so amazing that Michael was able to connect with you and you were able to give us some insights. And I'm after hearing that bio, I'm truly excited to have you on the show. I got questions that I'm furiously writing down as we speak. So,
Well, I'm thrilled you guys asked me to be on here. I love that we're all local, and I think you're doing some really good work that needs to be talked about more. And I think will hopefully encourage more people to choose the same path.
But it all started in a small town, Michaela, for you, of 4,000 people. I grew up in Miami, Florida, so growing
Okay.
up in a small town is very unfamiliar to me. John, I don't know if you were in a town as small as Michaela's, but probably not quite as big as Miami.
No, no, I'm the middleman. Like Tulsa, Oklahoma is like 400,000. So
Okay.
yeah.
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 So tell us about that, Michaela.
In some ways, it was a very idyllic childhood. A very big blue collar community. The town nearest us was founded basically around a steel mill. And so it was a big melting pot of immigrants who had come, hardworking people, good people, people who didn't have much but would give you everything that they had. And so the value of hard work was just ingrained in that community. And, I was really lucky to be part of small town high school sports and as small close knit community. I would ride my horse to track practice in the summers. I mean, by all means, it was like a very idyllic rural upbringing, kind of what you might think of. And it was cattle ranching land. My parents were teachers, so I had them home during the summer. They really cared about education, and I'm really grateful for that because that was really my ticket out. And again, I just want to emphasize what a great childhood I had, but because it was so rural, because there wasn't opportunity, because we didn't travel and, we had this wonderful community, but that was kind of it and nobody left. And I just had a real bug, I think, from a really young age that I knew I wanted more. I knew I wanted to see the world. I mostly wanted experience. I think you kind of grow up in a bubble and some people love that bubble. And for me, I was like, I love this. It's great. And I want to go see the world. And I want to be able to afford, I showed horses growing up. I wanted to be afford to do that at the bigger levels. And I wanted to understand how the world worked. And I just wanted more. And so that really, really made me dive into education because I knew in order to go to college, I was going to have to pay for it myself. And so I was able to work really hard. And I got a full ride scholarship to any school in Colorado. And so I chose University of Denver, which was a couple hours away. So it was this great bridge of like just far enough away your parents couldn't surprise you. I didn't go home on the weekends. Yeah, I was in the big city of Denver, kind of getting my foot in the door. And it was really a great transition then to go from that to Wall Street because I had a few stepping stones along the way.
Very cool.
Michaela, I spent some summers of mine. I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, but spent some summers in the Panhandle, Texas, in a town that was probably smaller than 4,000. But I know that during those times that I was there were very instrumental people that really imparted some wisdom on me during those stays. In a community of 4,000, I'm sure that there's got to be some people that you can look at outside your family and say, man, either teaching you entrepreneurship or, hard work or, just the ways of the world. Do you have some of those people that stood out to you from that community?
I know you mentioned outside of family. I was really lucky. My dad was a teacher and a college tennis coach. And so I think that mindset was really huge because, I mean, my brother and I were raised to have the championship mindset, right? We were raised to want the ball when the game is on the line. We were always raised with this mentality of bettering yourself. And so that was really important. And honestly, between him and my mom taught visually impaired students. And so she taught blind,
Oh,
and
wow.
visually impaired from birth to age 18. I had a really, I think, good foundation of just good people and what it means to be a good human and see that. But, it wasn't until I was in middle school, I got an award for community service. And the founder of that award, I'm now on his board actually, and have been on the judging committee for that award for, gosh, almost 2 decades now. He was a venture capitalist who quit actually when he's the age I'm right now, which is 37. He'd been very successful, and he actually quit to become a children's author. And he wrote the Merlin
Oh, wow.
series and dozens of very successful books. And he has been pivotal throughout my entire life of just knowing that there's a lot more out there, knowing that you can always transform yourself and be successful in another realm. I mean, he's the absolute utmost example of that. So I would say
Sure.
he was a very transformative figure for me because again, it was validating some work that I was doing that also allowed me to see the bigger picture, to encourage it and make that, make not only that project bigger, but do something bigger with my life. And so having, I think, that figure outside of the community was really important for me to go, it's okay to leave. It's okay to go do bigger things. And by the way, you can. And I've seen people do it. So his name is T.A. Barron, a well-known author, and he was an extremely meaningful figure in my life from a very young age to say, you're only in middle school, but what you're doing is right, and you can continue doing that, and you can move on to, doing bigger things in the world beyond just the community that you're in, while
Yeah.
still validating the importance of community, right? And where you live and being,
Yeah.
a servant leader in that figure. So I think he was probably the most important person that has followed me throughout my life. And I've had many other mentors, by the way, along the way.
Sure.
But he was really the first one that tapped into like, okay, there's more here. There's more here, and I can go figure out what that looks like.
This idea of the second act, it's so fascinating to me, like the idea, the concept of it. And I think more people are talking about it. They don't want to be so boxed into one thing throughout their life journey. And your life seems to reflect many second acts up to this point, and you're only 37, like you said, Michaela. So it's pretty fascinating to me. But you mentioned your dad instilling sort of a competitive aspect to you, and both you and your brother were competitive. I don't know if there was some sibling rivalries going on, like from sports. I'm always curious if he helped you be better and you helped him be better in that journey. But we've heard from so many guests, remember not just the family influence, but very specific people in their lives that have made huge impacts on their thinking and how they think about their communities and wanting to help others. So I really enjoyed hearing your story about that.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really important to have mentors, figureheads, and people that you can look up to help you along the way. That's something I'm incredibly passionate about, bringing the next generation up. And to your point, I think, when I was coming out of college, it was like you really had two routes if you wanted to go somewhere, especially in finance. It was consulting or banking, right? And I think the world is so different now. And what I try to tell people is that you can always reinvent yourself. There's no one way to skin the cat. And I think that's a huge change over the last decade or two for people, not just earlier in their career, but later in their career. And that's becoming more accepted across the board, which I love.
What prompted you to explore financial services of all fields of interest that you could have gone into? Did you see that as I mean, it's talked about a lot and is definitely a path to wealth creation, but I'm curious what planted that seed for you?
That was my question, Michael. Dang it.
Sorry, John. Darn, I didn't mean to steal your question.
We grew up very modestly. And so I never ever went without, but there were again opportunities I wanted that we weren't able to do. And so to me, understanding finance was the ticket to understanding like how do you actually create wealth. That's how naive I was, right? Because in school I had 2 degrees in finance, an undergrad and a master's in finance. And you learn corporate finance. You don't actually learn personal finance. So I think that goes to show you
Yeah.
that what was well-intentioned wasn't necessarily what I thought I was doing. But I think the framework is the same in that I wanted to be financially secure. I understood that with a finance degree or finance skills, you could, find jobs in many different avenues and become financially successful on your own. And so that was honestly why I chose the path down finance. And by the way, my older brother had also chosen finance, and so I was like, oh, he did that. There must be something to it. So maybe a little bit more art than science on that front.
Nice.
Michaela, we talk about the influences in our life and, coming from the small town, having a mentor. Did some of those things follow you when you go to the big city? Or are you reaching back to family, reaching back to your mentor as you start, developing who you are in Denver, kind of away from everything that you've known and up to that point?
That's a great question because I think there are two parallels to that. Certainly, yes. I mean, I was really lucky. I have a wonderful family. My parents are my biggest supporters and cheerleaders, and so I always had them as kind of that stable foundation. On the other hand, moving to a bigger city and wanting more out of my career, I knew I needed to find people who were down that path because my parents could do great in certain ways, but they didn't understand finance. They didn't understand investment banking. They didn't understand like what those different career paths look like. And so having mentors, in fact, my first boss ever in investment banking, when I came out of grad school, I did investment banking. That first managing director that I've ever worked for, in fact, I had brunch with him this past Sunday and several other
Oh, wow.
people I worked with, has been a huge champion for me in my career. And he's been amazing because he's seen my entire career and he's followed me and he wants to support what's best for me. And so he was one of the people that I was like a little nervous to tell I quit my job and I'm doing something new. Like, is he going to think less of you? He's
Yeah.
had this amazingly successful career, just had a huge exit a couple of years ago, and is a little bit onto his second act, thinking about what he wants to do next.
Very nice.
But having people like that, I think, who I always say this, you need to find those people who understand you personally and professionally. And it's
Yeah.
great if you have both of those, but if you can have both of those in one person, that's the golden ticket. Because I think you need to find people that you can emulate your whole life about, not just compartmentalize work. I think to your point earlier, Michael, we talked about how, there's not just one way to do it anymore. And I think it used to be a separation of all of these things, and who you are at work is who you are at work, and then kind of you come home to your family. But it's not like that anymore. The world isn't like that anymore. And so I think you kind of need this complete cohesiveness out of mentors as you go that'll support you in all the best way possible. And the only way to do that is if they know you personally and have your whole human intentions at heart also.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if I look at my grandfather's generation, and even to some extent my parents' generation, it was like you work for a company for many, many years, if not decades. And then it sort of, with my generation and the next generation after that, is like, okay, maybe you stay in an industry, but you move around different companies, try on different hats in that sector, in that line of work. And now I think to this whole conversation, it's more accepted at all levels, all stages of career, to try out different things and explore and see what gives you passion and purpose so that you can pursue these things. Because work's hard no matter where you go. So why not put your energy and effort behind things that maybe make it feel a little less like work?
It's exactly right.
So, Michaela, talk to me about that transition from DU, in Denver, you graduate, now you're trying to put this new degree to work. What does that look like? And how difficult was that road? Were you facing any adversity, any personal challenges, any mental hurdles that you're trying to jump over and trying to get yourself out into the corporate world?
Yeah, it was difficult. And it was difficult because investment banking is all consuming. And I'm a person that, like, I want to be good at everything in all aspects of my interests in my life. And so I put a lot of pressure on myself, whether it's work, whether it's personal relationships, whether it's competing with my horses or sports and being active and being in shape, all of the things. And then you go into investment banking and you find yourself sleeping at your desk a night or two a week, and you're working 100 hours a week, and it is the only thing that you are doing, right? I remember watching fireworks for New Year's Day go off from our balcony in the office, right? And so you go from having this complete life to being completely siloed into one category of your life,
Okay.
and that's all you do. And the only people you have relationships with are the guys in the bullpen with you, right? All the analysts, you're working the same amount of hours.
Yeah.
Who one of them is still my best friend to this day, the only other woman at the firm. And that was really
Wow.
hard because you kind of gave up everything that you had known of being this, well-rounded person to get college applications, to get college scholarships, etc. In college, I worked full time. I went to school full time. I rode horses and, did a bunch of extracurriculars. And then all of a sudden you're in banking and it is just all consuming. So that was really, really hard for me because not that I've always been a workhorse. I could work the hours, but doing one thing all the time and
Yeah.
giving up everything else was like having blinders on.
Yeah, some of the horror stories I've read from the investment banking industry in particular, about the long hours and holidays and all the things it's all consuming. So I commend you on going that road. It's a very difficult road. It's hard to get into the industry and then to sort of make your way and create your name for yourself in the industry. That's amazing. And it looks like you sat down with some pretty impressive names, Zuckerberg and Tim Cook. I mean, tell us a little bit more about that experience, and then, how maybe some of the allure or novelty of sitting down with these huge names of these publicly traded companies starts to wear off, and where your mind started to go and lead you into the direction you're going now.
Yeah, so I left investment banking to work on the buy side, and I had an opportunity to work for a self-made billionaire at, a firm that had a big brand name. And again, we've just talked about my background, right? I came from this very humble beginning, and all of a sudden I find myself with like marble floors and like the fanciest wooden walls you've ever seen. And that was very intimidating. But I loved working on Wall Street
Well,
because you got access to this side of the world that everybody hears about in their daily life. You hear how the stock market is doing, or you might hear about a company reporting earnings, but I was in the thick of it. And to be, mid 20s in that life was really, really cool to be given some big responsibility around it. And so I loved it. I had a ball. I got to, like you mentioned, I got to take the company's private jet and go meet with Mark Zuckerberg and Sheryl Sandberg on the Facebook IPO. And we were one of the few funds that actually ended up
Wow.
getting a meeting with them. And I have stories about that. And we were a big shareholder in really cool companies. I covered consumer and technology stocks. So think like Chipotle,
Okay.
Lululemon, Starbucks. So I got to meet with Howard Schultz all the time, several
Oh,
times.
wow.
And so it was this amazing light, right? Of going from like this very sheltered childhood to all of a sudden being able to, have these conversations with big household name companies and to kind of actually just learn how trading stocks works, to learn how the markets work, to learn how the economy worked. That to me, I just had a ball doing that. I loved every minute of it. But much like banking, when it became a 7-day-a-week job, where this is before we had laptops because I'm that old, you had to come in the office to do your modeling. And everybody came in on
Oh,
Saturdays. That was kind of like a shortened day. But when it became like, oh, you weren't in on Sunday kind of thing, I was like, you know what?
Oh man.
I want to be great at what I do. I'm loving the opportunities that I'm getting. I've learned so much and actually really didn't want to leave, but I was like, you know what? I need a day. I'm now like 5, 6 years into my career. I'm like, I need a day during the week to like kind of have a little bit of a life here. And so that's when I left and started doing corporate turnarounds. And that was a very natural transition because I went from being, the person that's the investor calling the company to get my diligence and research done to being that person on the other side of the table talking to the investors because I understood that speak. And so I did
okay.
kind of all the gamuts in corporate finance, did several turnarounds. I think we did 2 exits in 6 years and we're working on a third.
Wow.
Did another big transformation at H&R Block, and that's where I got the CFO seat. And I was commuting to Toronto to be CFO of that company full time and still running investor relations for H&R Block based out of Kansas City. And so all of this culminated into I'm 15 years into my career and it's so funny because I'm such a person that really doesn't have a lot of limits. But I
Yeah.
just I was on my flight to Toronto and I'm such a tough person. And I found myself crying the entire flight to Toronto. I'm like, what's going on here? So I had to take a really serious look. And I was like, gosh, I've been grinding, right? I work full time through college and grad school. I've been grinding for 15 years in these roles that I've loved, truly loved the work that I was doing. And I think that's a big differentiating factor for people. I really enjoyed what I did. But I wanted to do it differently. I wanted to add value. I wanted to work really hard. That's just how I'm wired. But I wanted to do it in a different way and I wanted to do it with a little bit more meaning. And so it was really funny. Everything just culminated. My longtime boss there retired that I just loved, adored, would be the lead horse into battle for. And he retired. He had retired really early, by the way, at 49, which shocked everyone. But he did what all of us are trying to do, right? And he
Yeah.
did it so that he could spend time with his family and pursue his passions and hobbies more. And he made it happen. And I just realized it was time to do the same thing for myself. I had been working for a lot of people. I'd been creating value for a lot of other people, but it was always on other terms. And
Yeah.
I want to be here in my office in Denver. I want to go ride my horse tonight to train and I want to be around friends and family. And I wanted to just do it differently. And so it just became really clear to me that I think I had had the experiences I needed to have the confidence to do things on my own. And I really decided I wanted to have a little bit more control over my life and how I work and when I work to be able to do all of these other things that I had interest in. And it's funny, it just the only way I can describe it to you is it was just time. Like everything like came together and it was just time to do that.
Michaella, just before we get to your departure, a lot of people sit down and read books about the people that you're meeting face to face. Tell me about some of those interactions and if you learned anything from these high profile individuals that you can't read about or you saw in their daily habits or you saw with their interactions. Because I'm always interested, how people appear in books is great, but how they are in real life is
Yeah.
much more informative. So any
Yeah.
insights that did you glean from these meetings?
I have some very interesting stories, certainly across the gamut of that. I would just say, I don't think you can separate who you are as a person and who you are as a leader. And so I think it's very clear. I think some people try to, but it always comes through. And so I think, authentic leadership, having authenticity is everything. And I think that's what I learned most is if you are working for good people that you truly believe in, you'll run through walls for, right? And that's the type of leader I want to be for people I'm working with. If you're working for someone you do not respect, even from a personal level, it's hard to have that loyalty professionally. That's one of the biggest things. And I actually had an interesting interaction with Howard Schultz. That was one of the reasons that that kind of set me down this path. It's one of the reasons that I ended up leaving Wall Street. And that was, I went up to have a meeting with him, and it was, these companies go into a quiet period 30 days before earnings. So it was right before the end of the quiet period. And you prepare so much, right? Because you want to have a line of questioning to get your edge, right? That other analysts you think other analysts on Wall Street don't understand, that's going to make the outcome different than consensus. So I had really prepared this line of questioning around the comp that Starbucks was lapping. And the comp is like same store sales. How much did those grow year over year? And I did a ton of research into the comp last year and what was going on this year. And long story short, I came away and I was like, oh, they're going to blow the comp out of the water. People don't realize that this thing was rolling off. And so it's much easier compared than we think it's going to be. And so we ended up buying more stock ahead of the deal, ahead of the earnings call. And the earnings call went as we expected, and stock goes up. Like everything I thought to be true was right. We're like high-fiving. Everyone is like, oh, big deal. And I just remember thinking, like, Howard Schultz runs this company. Like, he is the one that's creating value. I asked him some questions like, I'm not the one creating value. I want to go create value and build instead of trade around value. And that was one of the reasons why I left Wall Street, because I wanted to be more like him, where I was building something and less of the person who thinks they're the smartest guy in the room because they can ask a couple questions and make a bet on it, right?
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply.
Member Week is here at Lowe's. Don't miss your chance to get up to 40% off hundreds of items like paint, faucets, vanities, doors, and more. Shop our exclusive deals happening in-store and online now through July 18th. Not a member? Join My Lowe's Pro Rewards for free today and get ready to save more. Lowe's, we help, you save. Loyalty program subject to terms and conditions. Details at lowes.com/terms. Subject to change.
So you mentioned a Toronto flight where you were emotional, and that was, I don't know if it was the beginning of the end or the end of the beginning for you, and whether you were in your operator role now versus being on the Wall Street side. But tell me more about how that event led into where you are today and some of the cool things that you're doing.
Yeah, and so we've talked a lot about. I kind of grew up pretty humbly. I wasn't traveling a lot. One of the things I've loved in my career is traveling, and I could be on the road a couple days a week for the past 15 years, whether it was to Europe or around the U.S. or wherever. And I actually really enjoyed it. I got to see new places. I love traveling. I like the perks of traveling to use for personal vacations. Like I actually really loved being on the road. I was someone that really tolerated that. I think you kind of either do or you don't, and I loved being on the road. And it never bothered me to get on an airplane, even at a moment's notice of like, yeah, go fly here and solve this problem. Great, like let's go. And it's an adventure. And so I got on a flight, and I used to have to fly there often on Sundays. Sometimes I'd fly there during the week, but sometimes I would fly there on Sunday to be there on Monday morning. And I would take the 11:30 a.m. flight out of Denver on Sunday morning. So, I live far out by the foothills, so I'd be leaving my house around 9 a.m. on Sunday, and I'd lose a whole weekend day. And I remember getting on the Air Canada flight, and I normally actually do my best thinking on airplanes. Like it's this vortex, right? Of
Yeah.
a little bit of it puts you in a still position for a certain number of hours. And I've always thought there's actually a study that actually says you think more creatively on airplanes. I've always felt the same.
Oh, interesting.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and
All right.
when I saw that, I was
Good
like,
news
oh,
for
good, I
me.
feel validated. But I think it just gives you this time to really sit down and not be distracted by other to-dos. And so I always was a workhorse on airplanes. Like I could get on an airplane and just crank out work like crazy. And I got on the airplane and we're like going to the tarmac. We haven't taken off yet. And I'm streaming tears. And I'm not a person who cries. Like that's not a badge of honor. I'm just not an emotional person like that.
Sure.
And I just like silent cried the entire way to Toronto, landing there and then going through customs and getting in the car to my hotel. And I was like, there's something wrong when I'm the person who has loved my entire life to get on an airplane for any reason. And like my body is physically telling me it doesn't want to do this anymore. And of course, there were other reasons, work stress. And I think, again, back to like working with good people and being surrounded by people that you love and trust and good leaders, I think that helps insulate you to those things. And I was just at a point where I really didn't have those anymore. And so I had this physical reaction. And that was what really struck me of like, okay, there needs to probably be an end to this. And I started thinking about what was next, and a few other events transpired. And I was like, you know what? There's never a good time to do this. There's never a good time to walk away. I think if you're always like, oh, when I get my next bonus or when my equity vests next, right? There's always a carrot, but people get wrapped up into the carrots. And I just think it's so hard to get off the train. But if you can walk away from that, I think you probably have what it takes to build your own business and do your own thing. And so it was strange because it was not hard for me to walk away, even to walk away from the carrots that I had waiting on tables that I could have said, oh, I'll stick it out 6 more months. It was just the time to go. And I like to make a clean break of things. And I just decided to do it.
Did you call anybody after that flight and that decision, or was it strictly like, I'm in my zone, this is the decision I'm going with, I'll let people know after things sort of play out?
So I started talking to my closest mentors right after that. And then there was
Okay.
another scenario that played out at work. And I called like my personal board of directors, who are my former CEOs, my former general counsels, and former bosses.
Okay.
And also some public company board members who I thought would truly tell me what they believe, not what I wanted to hear. And I kind of told them where I was at, and they all said, okay, it's clear you need to leave. It's time for you to go on to the next thing. Let's think about this overnight, and let's get on the phone in the morning and let's make a plan. And I got on the phone in the morning, and every single person on my personal board of directors said, it's time. Because they were like, you know what? We were thinking about like, maybe could you make it through the end of the year and make, blah, blah, blah. Like, let's figure out, is there a time frame to do this in where you can be looking for another job or like have some runway to think about what's next? And they all got on the phone in the morning. They're like, nope, we thought about it and it's time. It's time. And so that felt really good for me to know that the people in my corner were like validating to what I wanted to do. You don't always get that. And I'm not saying it has to be that way, but it felt really good for me to be like, okay, this isn't something rash. One person remarked it was the least Michaella thing you've ever done in your life, and it's my favorite thing you've ever done, right? So that goes to show you like there might be some good choices made in the process.
Yeah, there's some power and some value and some excitement about just pivoting and trying something new. And that's a good way to think about it. Your personal board of directors, I think that's maybe the first time we've heard that on this show. So our audience will find that fascinating. And, oftentimes people think I need to just do this and then tell people after the fact. You're getting some validation and some confirmation, your community that you're relying on that aren't, family will often tell you a lot of what you want to hear.
That's right.
And these people will tell you, things you want to hear, but also some objective sort of advice or perspectives, which is super valuable.
And that's so important because I think family has their own lens on you, right? I think my family, the way we grew up, my parents are still like, oh my gosh, like, are you okay? Are you looking for a job? Like, what do you, how can you do this? And I had my finances in a row to do that. But I think having the other people, this personal board of directors that we're talking about, who knew me so well and knew what my intentions were, having their outside opinion was really, really important to me in order to make this transition. But what's interesting, I think a lot of people maybe have a better idea of what they're going to do next when they quit. For me, it was just like, it's time. And I think that was really different. But what it did was that act of being able to walk away from the corporate world. I think a lot of people can't do that. And I think a lot of people don't do that because they're scared to. They maybe don't have their finances in order. Families obviously, make that a little bit trickier. But I walked away, and it was the single most empowering thing I've ever done in my entire life, to be able to say, actually, no, like I can choose my own destiny, and I'm going to do that now. And I'm going to go figure that out. And I'm going to give myself this runway to do that. And that, again, it was so empowering that I started looking into the data, and I realized, I'd had this experience of I've been financially independent since the day I left for college. And so I had figured it out and scrapped it together and built this life for myself. And then I walked away and I was like, holy cow, I now have this different lens on it. And when I started doing research about women and money, I realized the data is so clear that women are tremendously behind men when it comes to financial confidence, financial empowerment, and just being able to make decisions around money. And so that was really fascinating to me. But if I had not quit my job, my corporate, very, cush in some ways corporate job, I don't think I would have put those pieces together, and I wouldn't have the fire lit underneath me to go, okay, I was able to do this. It's the single most empowering thing I've ever done. Women especially are so far behind men in being able to even just put their finances together. There's a real gap here, and I've done it. And so I feel like I can be a role model to women, and I can, I have 2 degrees in finance, Wall Street experience, CFO experience. Like, I have a story to tell to help women. And I think, there are women in toxic relationships. There are women in jobs that they don't want to be in. There are women who are just stuck in their life because they don't have financial independence to change and have the power of choice. And so, as you stated earlier, it's not about money. It's about being able to make these choices for ourselves and for our families. And so that's what completely set me on the path that I'm on today. And I really don't think if I hadn't had the culmination of every moment of my life up until then, I would have known what this second act could be or how I could help women in that way.
Yeah, the principle of what you're talking about, I mean, I've taken so much away from this conversation, and I think it's maybe universally sought after to have an FU fund because it is empowering and gives you the freedom that you're looking at. But the market segment that you've carved out, I think, has sort of more impactful benefits just because of all the reasons you described. And I don't know if this is where you were going, John, but I would love to hear your approach to this and how you got started, Michaella, because I think it's really interesting for your audience as much as ours.
Well, I almost as a therapeutic reason when I quit my job, and I was like, okay, what am I going to do next? And I started telling people, and everyone was in a panic about it. They're like, you did what? Like, are you okay? What's going on? But I was okay because I had the financial planning and foresight to have an FU fund and to have everything in order to do that. And so that immediately struck a nerve to me when everyone was like, I wish I could do that, but I can't. I'm like, you can. You need to be prepared to do it, but anyone can do it. And I realize when I'm talking to people, it doesn't matter if you're a CFO of a company. It doesn't matter if you're an hourly worker. All that matters is if you save enough and protect yourself financially enough to do that, right? 6 to 12 months of a runway for you to figure out what your next move is. You just scale that down to whatever your income is and whatever your budget is. Like, this is not magic stuff. But so few people are actually taught the really basics of finance that it was almost like therapy. The first 2 weeks after I quit my job, I was on my laptop typing my life story and typing the advice I would give. And through that process, I did a lot of research and found all of these big, huge studies that validated all the things I was thinking about, especially with women. And so I banged out a book in essentially a couple of weeks. I banged out 3 of the 5 chapters of my book. And through that, I started, people are like, what are you doing? How are you spending your time? And the reaction I got was unbelievable. In fact, a woman who actually came from generational wealth that I'd known for a long time, her daughters were grown. She had recently been divorced and didn't handle the finances because traditionally that's just a role that the man has held.
Sure.
And I was telling her the story and she starts crying and I'm like, I think I struck a nerve. Tell me what's going on. And she was like, I came from money. I married a man with money. And when everything unraveled, I realized he had not handled the finances correctly. I had to figure out how to get us out of debt. I'd never learned how to manage money in my life because everyone had patted me on the head of like, oh, you're going to be fine. And so to see a reaction like hers of someone who's, in their 50s with grown daughters having this reaction to this type of story, telling me, I want my daughters to read your book, that was a really powerful moment. And then I'm talking to my friends about it and they're like, oh my gosh, we tell each other everything about from the men that you're dating, right, to the gossip in the world, but we don't talk about money because it's so taboo. And all of the pieces just kind of started coming together. There's really something here, and there's a huge gap for me to not only help my friends and family, but to help kind of the bigger picture. And that really lit a fire underneath me to say, okay, there's a real there. And so I've been working on finishing the book and doing consulting on this front because it's a topic that I care so much about. It's a topic that has affected me personally, and it's a problem that there's a real need for in today's society. So that's what gets me out of bed. That's what gets me so excited about the work that I'm doing now. And It's so different than what I've done for the prior 15 years of my career, but I've never had more fun and more energy around working on a problem.
Sounds like the perfect recipe.
We'll see, but honestly, I think it's a different story. I think a lot of people have an idea of what they're going to move on to and they prepare for that. Mine necessarily isn't the way to go, as we talked about. There's many ways to skin the cat, but if I hadn't taken the leap to say, I know there's a next thing for me that's more meaningful and different, that maybe isn't as, stable financially to start with. If I hadn't taken that leap, I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now. And I'm really, really grateful for that.
Michaela, that's one of the things I was going to say is, you talked about productivity on an airplane, how that goes up in that space. And I was going to say, creativity and grit, I think, are increased when we cut the cord from what we know and cut the cord from what we think we're really good at. But then it's all of a sudden up to what's next. And you mentioned you didn't wait till you had all that information, but you started to gain more information and you started to gain that clarity and you focused down on that niche, which is, one of the things coaches have to do is, there's
Right.
so many coaches out there. Who am I going to coach? And then you narrowed it down to this specific. You could almost put a face on who you were coaching because it was the opposite of who you were and some of the people that you're interacting with. But that clarity that's coming in is what we hear from a lot of our guests that when they cut the cord and they say, "Yep, I'm going to do something else. I'm going to do this for myself." It's just like all these ideas come rushing in and you were the same and you found that and just it propelled you to where you are now. So it's really cool to hear.
That's such an important point, John. I feel like it's almost the push you need to jump off the cliff, and then you're like, now I got to figure it out. I got to figure out how to pull this parachute. And if you're not put in that situation, I think a lot of times it's just way easier not to ever make
Yeah.
yourself do that. And to your point about grit, I could not agree. I think grit is the single most important quality you can have when it comes to being successful, building your own business, being an entrepreneur, just frankly in life in general. So I love that word. Thanks for using it.
Tell me, Michaela, if you encounter somebody on the street or you encounter somebody after a speaking event and they come up to you and they say, "Michaela, I just don't know where to start. I think I know what your advice is, but what would it be?"
Well, I always tell them the fact that you're asking the question is the single best thing you can do. You can't make it better if you don't take any action. So understanding that you need to be better with your finances is most important. And I think people don't want to look at their budget on a monthly basis or even their credit card bill or their bills because they know they're like, oh man, I don't even want to know what it is. So it's better if I'm even just a little bit ignorant to the fact that I'm not managing it well. So I would say the single most important thing you can do is understand your money in and understand all of your expenses going out. And this is the most simple advice. Every single month, you go through your budget and you basically take a checkbook approach and you balance your budget and you see how much you spent that much and what went where. Now, before you even get anywhere else to saving, understanding where your money is going is so important because then you can go, oh my gosh, do I really need this Amazon cart that I'm going to check out with of $63 of random stuff? Like, do I really need to do that? Or, oh my gosh, I had no idea how much I was spending on groceries. I need to be more cognizant of it. So simply understanding your ins and outs is the first and most important thing. When I take people through my program, I actually start even bigger picture of where have you been, where are you, and what do you want, where you want to go? Because that then takes the budgeting process into a little bit more detail to say, okay, how much should you be spending? How much should you be saving? Where do you need to cut back? But the way I like to think I'm a little bit different is, you look at some of the older guys in the world, the Dave Ramsey's, the Susie Ormans, they're really big on kind of one formula. I really think it is important to have experiences throughout your life versus waiting until retirement. I don't think going without and strangling yourself of any good things is
Yep.
the way to go. And so I make sure we prioritize the budget of what are the things you care most about, what are the things you love to do. Whether it's going to ride your horse, which, by the way, owning a horse is not financially sound. Nobody can argue otherwise,
It is.
right?
Yeah, no,
But it's
yeah.
the single most important thing to me in order for like my mental health and my sanity and
Yep.
developing and practicing grit, for example. So how do you fit in the most important things? How do you prioritize those in your budget with other important things like saving, not only for retirement, but first and foremost, saving your FU fund or your emergency fund? That's what we concentrate on first because if you don't have that, you can't even think about the bigger picture down the road. You need to be financially stable right now and get yourself to that place first. So it's kind of a roundabout answer to your question because there are so many nuances to that. But understanding the bigger picture of what you want in life translates directly into how you should be managing your money.
It's good.
And just hearing you describe your business and your approach, it doesn't sound like you need to sort of have no foundation. It could be people who already have foundational elements to what they're doing, but you can help them think even more strategically to get to where they want to be and have these dimensions to their financial portfolio that give them that flex that they need in life along each stage of the journey.
That's exactly right. That's such an important point because while yes, you do need to get foundationally financially secure, if you are in a higher up corporate role and you have more money than, you're like, I'm saving a ton of money, it's in a money market. And you're like, no, okay, now we can get into some fun, sophisticated stuff of buying rental properties or, setting up tax advantage solutions, things like that. You can go across the whole gamut. But what's interesting about that is that your basic financial principles still apply. Are you tracking your money every single month when you're making those decisions? And so you kind of come full circle, but if you take people along the journey of getting there from the very beginning to getting more of the sophisticated decision making, you kind of still follow the same framework, but having an accountability partner is actually really important along the way, especially with money. And the data tells us that of almost anything, having an accountability partner with money drives more success in saving and being more financially secure. So having a person like that is also really important.
Wow. The accountability person or a coach or mentor, that is a reoccurring theme we continue to hear on the show. When people leave and they go start their own thing, and they're usually more successful. And in this case, financial, strategies, they're more successful when they have that person that they've got to look in the face and say, yeah, I didn't do it this month. Well, why? And asking those questions backwards. So going back to the mentorship that you talked about having in college and then leaving and getting into the personal financial business, are you still relying on those coaches, or have you branched out and developed new relationships that are encouraging you now?
That's a really good question. Both, right? Because I still want to have the same people who know me so well and know my journey and understand it and understand who I am and that I can seek advice from in all ways. But building a business is entirely different than being in the corporate world. And so I've had to find mentors of how in the heck do you do this? And so I've been able to do that through my network of people who have written books, of people who have built businesses like this. And they've coached me to do, this is a really important point, they've coached me to do a lot of things I feel very uncomfortable doing. Like having a presence on social media, honestly, makes me want to throw up. And that's strategy right here. I mean, I hate social media. My friends who know me know this about me. I think there's so much unhealthiness. I think there's a lot of mental stress derived from social media. But when you're building a business, you have to have a visible presence on social media, and that's where you find a lot of your clients. And so a lot of these new mentors have made me approach things in new and different ways that I'm uncomfortable with, but there's this whole learning curve, right? Because it's completely different. So you have to find those people who have been successful in this new route because your old plan does not work to being translated into being an entrepreneur.
Yeah. If you can't become your biggest cheerleader, your biggest evangelist and leverage these channels to do that, you're just putting yourself in a disadvantage. And the reconciliation issue comes in if you're like a humble person, if you operate with a sense of humility and operate with servant leadership. It's really hard to talk about yourself, especially the things that you're doing and why you should work with you and pay attention to me and all this kind of stuff. It's a hard thing to reconcile. So I get it. John gets it. You're sharing your struggles with that. And I know a lot of our community struggles with that as well as they're thinking about their second or 10th act. Michaella, so thank you for sharing that.
You bet. And I think it's so important to support other people through that because it's funny. I say that all the time to someone who has an incredible social media presence. I'm like, I just can't do it. And they're like, guess what? I was you and you have to. And like, this is just how it works now. And so supporting other people when you see, their posts in the same manner has been a really nice thing to see as well and learn also.
Michaella, we're wrapping up the show, but one thing that we love to do is take somebody like yourself who's gone through a first and second act and is growing, whatever's new and in front of them and is so excited and has got so much passion. We ask our guests, practical advice or insights that you could provide for people that want to take that jump, that want to get out of that rat race or want to get out of what they've been doing or want to start fresh. What would you say to somebody that came up to you and said, I want to start a second act?
Yeah, I love that. I would say probably two pieces of advice. You're not going to be surprised by the first one. If you are financially secure and understand your finances, it's going to be a lot easier for you to do that. Because I think one of the biggest things I see when people want to do a second act is they don't have their finances in order to be able to do it, or they go do it and they're all excited about it, and then they realize they're missing their paycheck, or they wish they would have made, making more money, or they're spending more of their savings, and it starts to panic them, and they feel like they have to abandon what they're doing. So if you have your finances in order and you understand what your runway is to build a business, I think it not only makes you feel less stressed about what you're doing, but it also lights a fire because you're like, okay, at this amount of time and I'm good. So I'm going to, build a business. I'm going to have goals to get to this point by this point. Like, I think that actually helps you be a better entrepreneur along the way. So that's the first advice I would give. And then secondly, I think if you're at this point, there's usually a pivotal moment where you have to shed other people's expectations. At least I had to, because even my mentors had this vision of me going on and doing a lot of other things in the corporate world. And who knows where life is going to go, right? You never know where life's going to take you. But like I mentioned before, sometimes I was even a little nervous to tell people I was changing paths because I felt like they'd invested in me and this version of me.
Yeah.
And I think that really leads to a lot of unhappiness. I don't think the point of life is to be happy, but I think it's really hard if you're living for someone else's expectations. So
Sure.
if you're going to jump into a second act, I think you need to get really comfortable with who you are and living through your own authenticity. I always say, like, for me, I answer the man upstairs myself when I go to bed at night. And
Nice.
I think it took a really long time in my career. I'm very much a people pleaser, and I know that about myself. It was really hard for me to not do what I thought other people wanted me to do. And once you get comfortable with that, I think you can really shine with like what your actual talents are and where you want to go, because it's something you're so invested in yourself. So those are my two pieces.
That's good. That's good. When you're talking about point number one, being financially secure, I think of that analogy of the burning of ships, right? You commit all in. And I was thinking, as you're talking, it's so much easier to burn the ships when you've got your supplies already on the island.
That's exactly right.
If you burn your ships and your supplies are back there burning with them, it makes you really dig in.
Right.
So make life easier on you if you can. And we've talked to people in both cases, that have had to leave what they left behind, and they weren't ready financially, but they made it work. And going back to that grit and tenacity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But to your point, it frees up, I think, that capacity to be creative and that
Agreed.
time to put thought on paper and to be free with some of those ideas, rather than thinking, oh shoot, I got to put food on the table right away. And I've been in that situation where I left the military and thought, oh, I'm going to just figure it out. And then, a couple months pass and you think, shoot, I've got two boys that I'm looking in the eye with,
Right.
in their eyes, and thinking I gotta start working harder to provide. So,
Right.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a forcing mechanism. Sometimes it's unexpected, but we've talked about grit and creativity and all of the words of wisdom you've shared with our audience, Michaella, and you put all that together, and it greatly increases your odds of success, no matter what your sort of
Absolutely.
endeavor is. Okay, so as we wrap up this incredible conversation, Michaella, how do we let our audience know where to find you? What's the best place for them to do that?
For somebody that doesn't love social media.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I was going to say this, so I have to say my social handles. My website, michaellagallina.com, is a great way to get in touch with me and understand kind of the basics of all the ways that we can work together, whether it's speaking to corporations and bringing awareness to this topic and educating women of with my basic financial format, whether it's just getting on the newsletter, whether it's wanting to work one-on-one and do some financial life consulting. That's a good place to start. And then also on social media, same thing. My handles are Michaella_Gallina. So appreciate that.
Absolutely. We'll be sure to leave all that in the show notes for the audience
Absolutely.
so that they can get in
Thank
touch with
you.
you.
Thank you. It's been such a pleasure. What a great conversation. This has been so enjoyable. Thanks so much for
Yeah.
having me.
Yeah, this
I
has
mean,
been a lot of fun.
it's fun, like Michael said when we started the show, having another Denverite on and
Yeah.
being able to connect afterwards, and we find so much response from the local community. It's really fun
Yep.
to have, people reach out to us and say, man, these local people are just astounding, and you're no different. So
Thank you.
thank you for being on the show and giving us the time, tell us your story, and hopefully encourage, some of those listeners out there, especially some of those women who think, I can relate. I'm one of Michaela's target audience, and I would love to grow in that, regard. So very thankful for that,
Thank
Michaela. And so thank you so much for being on the show. And Michael,
John,
this
what an
was
episode. What an episode.
it was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't want to end it, but we have to end it at some point.
Well, I was gonna say I can't tell you how much I personally learned from these conversations, and
Yeah.
like Michaela is able to sit down with some of these big name CEOs and hear their story and get to know them on a deeper level, and I feel like that was us today. So well done.
Yep. Amazing conversation and so many takeaways from this one. Thank you so much, Michaela.
Thank you both so much. Really enjoyed this.
All right. Awesome. Till next time, John.
We'll see you.
See ya.
The Second Act with Michael and John stars Michael Newborn and John Ballenger. The podcast is produced by Seltzer Kings. For more information on the show, check out michaelandjohn.com, or if you'd like to get involved in the conversation, give the guys a shout on their socials at The Second Act Movement on most platforms. Thanks for listening.
Seltzer Kings.
Podcasts.